Welcome back to The Better Journey, the podcast where we try to travel a little better. Not necessarily more expensively, not necessarily more luxuriously, and definitely not more stressfully. Just with a little more understanding of what we're actually getting into before we hand over our credit card and start counting down the days. Today we're talking about cruises, Alaska cruises specifically. And I want to be upfront about something. I came to Alaska cruises as a bit of a skeptic. I'd spent years helping people plan land-based adventures, road trips, trekking holidays, self-drive itineraries where you wake up and decide over breakfast whether you're turning left or right. The idea of a floating resort with a fixed schedule and 1,000 other passengers didn't exactly set my heart racing. I thought I understood what cruising was. I was wrong. Which is the theme I return to more often than I'd like in this line of work. So the first Alaska cruise client I really remember was a couple, retired teachers, both of them, who came in having already decided on a ship. They'd done their research when they told me. They knew the deck plan. They'd read reviews of the main dining room. They had opinions about the entertainment. What they had not done was look carefully at where the ship was actually going, or when, or whether the thing they most wanted to see, a glacier up close from the ship, was actually included in this itinerary they'd chosen. It wasn't. They had booked a perfectly good cruise that happened to skip the part of Alaska they dreamed about for 20 years. And we caught it in time, which was lucky, but it stuck with me. Because these weren't careless people. They were thorough, detail-oriented, experienced travelers. They just hadn't been told what questions to ask first. So that's what this episode is about. Not which ship has the best gym or whether the buffet is open past midnight. The stuff that actually shapes whether you come home saying, "That was incredible," or "Okay, that's fine, I guess." A cruise is not one product. So let me start with something that sounds obvious, but apparently isn't. A cruise is not one type of vacation. Saying, "I want to go on a cruise" is a bit like saying, "I want to stay in a hotel." Great. What kind? A quiet countryside retreat, a family resort with 17 water slides in a lazy river, a boutique place in the city with exposed bricks and artisanal coffee, a casino hotel where someone is always winning something loudly at 2 in the morning. All of those are hotels. None of them are the same experience. Cruises work the same way. A cruise can be elegant and genuinely unhurried. Think formal dinners, enrichment lectures, early morning on deck with a real sense of quiet. It can also be a floating entertainment complex where there's a comedy show, a rock climbing wall, a go-kart track, and a silent disco happening simultaneously, and you have to choose. Neither of those is better. The question is, which one is better for you at this particular moment in your life, traveling with the specific people you're traveling with? I once worked with a couple, mid-50s, empty nesters, celebrating a significant anniversary, who had booked a very large, very popular family-oriented ship because it had spectacular reviews and looked genuinely impressive online. And it was impressive. It was also during the school holiday week they'd chosen. Absolutely packed with children. Wonderful children, I'm sure, with lovely families. But this couple had imagined something rather different. They'd imagined quiet mornings, leisurely dinners, a certain kind of romantic atmosphere. What they got was a buffet line with a 9-year-old cutting in front of them. The ship wasn't bad. The match was bad. And this matters because we tend to evaluate travel purchases the same way we evaluate most purchases, by quality and price. But travel has this third dimension that's easy to overlook, which is fit. A 5-star product that's wrong for you is worse than a 3-star product that's exactly right. So before you even open a comparison website, it's worth sitting with some honest questions. Not aspirational questions, honest ones. What time do you actually wake up on holiday? Not what time you plan to wake up, what time do you actually wake up? Do you want evenings with live music and a bar? Or evenings with a book and an early night? Are you traveling primarily for scene, for food, for family time, for relaxation, or for a combination of all of those? Do you enjoy dressing up for dinner, or does the phrase "formal night" makes you want to immediately cancel the whole trip? Do you want a big ship where you could spend a week and still not see every deck, or a smaller ship where you'd recognize other passengers by the third day? These aren't trick questions, but the answers will do more to narrow your options than any amount of reading star ratings online. For Alaska, choose the journey before the ship. Now, Alaska specifically. Alaska's main cruise season runs from May through September, and I want to say something about that range that a lot of brochures gloss over. Those months are not all the same experience. May and early June can be genuinely beautiful in a way that surprises people. The snow is still sitting heavy on the mountains, the crowds haven't fully arrived yet, and you can sometimes find meaningfully lower prices. The trade-off is that the weather is cooler. Not necessarily unpleasant, but you're not going to be sitting on a deck in a sundress. Some attractions and excursion operators are just getting the season started. So there's occasionally a slightly unfinished quality to things, like arriving at a restaurant on its first week open. July and August are the heart of the season. Daylight is extraordinary. In some parts of Alaska, in midsummer, you're getting 19-20 hours of light, which is either thrilling or deeply disorienting depending on how good your cabin curtains are. The widest selection of departures, the most excursion options, the fullest version of the experience. Also, the most families traveling, especially in August when school holidays overlap everywhere, which is either wonderful or irrelevant depending on whether you have children of your own or are desperately trying to escape other people's. September is where it gets interesting. Prices often drop noticeably. The crowds thin out. There can be a real sense of having the place more to yourself. But the weather becomes genuinely unpredictable. Some seasonal services start winding down and a few itinerary options disappear. I've had clients come back from September Alaska sailings absolutely raving. I've had other deal with grey skies and rough water for most of the week. The same is technically true of July, but the odd shift in September. None of this means one month is objectively better. It means you're choosing between different versions of the trip. And you should choose the version that matches what you actually want, rather than just defaulting to whatever fits the school calendar or whatever weeks happen to be available. So, round trip or one way? The next big decision, and this one generally changes the shape of the holiday, is whether you want a round trip cruise or a one-way cruise. A round trip might leave Vancouver or Seattle, travel through Southeast Alaska, and return to the same port. One flight, or for those of us in the Vancouver area, potentially no flight at all. Everything is logistically tidy. You know exactly where you'll be sleeping every night and when you'll be home. A one-way cruise travels between Vancouver and an Alaskan port, usually seaward or Whittier, near Anchorage, and the land arrangements on the Alaska end become part of the trip. This is where things get interesting and also slightly more complicated. The appeal of the one-way is that it lets you connect the cruise to an entirely different kind of Alaskan experience. You finish the coastal portion, the fjords, the Inside Passage, the glaciers, and then you keep going. Anchorage, Denali National Park, Talkeetna, and the Kenai Peninsula, interior Alaska, is a different world from coastal Alaska. The scale is different. The wildlife is different. The feeling of it is different. A cruise gives you Alaska the way it looks from the water. The land portion gives you Alaska the way it feels to actually stand in it and have no idea how far the wilderness actually goes in that direction. The disadvantage is there are genuinely more moving parts. Flights have to be coordinated at both ends. Hotels matter. Transfers matter. The sequence of the trip matters. I've helped clients put together beautiful one-way Alaska journeys that ran like clockwork. I've also seen well-intentioned itineraries fall apart because someone booked a non-refundable flight into Anchorage, forgetting that the cruise ends in Whittier, which is 2 hours away by road through a tunnel that has its own operating hours, which is a sentence I did not expect to say when I got into travel. But when someone sits across from me and says, "This might be my only trip to Alaska," and a lot of people say exactly that, I want them to at least think about it before automatically booking the neatest, easiest round-trip option. Coastal Alaska and interior Alaska are not the same place. You can love the cruise and still feel like you only saw one side of something much larger. Not every Alaska itinerary is equal. This is the part of the conversation where I often feel like I'm delivering news people weren't expecting, so I'll be direct about it. 2 cruises can both be advertised as 7-night Alaska cruises and deliver completely different versions of Alaska. One might offer serious, extended glacier viewing from the ship itself. Another might have glaciers technically on the itinerary, but offer them mainly as excursion add-ons once you're in port. One might visit Glacier Bay, another might visit Hubbard Glacier or College Fjord, or a different scenic area that's equally impressive, but not the one you had in your mind when you started planning. One might have you arriving in Juneau at 8 in the morning with a full day ahead of you. Another might arrive at 1 in the afternoon and have you back on the ship by 6. The last detail might seem minor. It isn't. If you have a whale watching excursion planned in Juneau, and the whale watching in Juneau is genuinely spectacular, by the way, the humpbacks there feed in concentrated areas that are relatively easy to access. Then the difference between an 8 o'clock arrival and a 1 o'clock arrival is the difference between a full relaxed excursion and a slightly rushed one. Glacier Bay National Park is worth talking about specifically because it comes up constantly and there's real confusion around it. Access to Glacier Bay is regulated. There's a limit of 2 cruise ships per day allowed into the park. 2 ships. On a busy summer day, there might be a dozen cruise ships sailing those waters. Most of them are not going to Glacier Bay. So if Glacier Bay is important to you, If it is the image you have in your head when you picture this trip, you need to confirm that your specific itinerary actually includes it, not just glaciers. Glaciers is not Glacier Bay. They are not interchangeable. The way I like to describe it to clients, the ship is the vehicle. The itinerary is the trip. You wouldn't buy a car based purely on its interior and forget to ask where it was going. Don't evaluate a cruise primarily on its ship and forget to ask what it actually is doing. Itinerary first, ship second, cabin third. Price only after you understand what you're actually comparing between options. Because if you compare price before you understand the itinerary, you might end up saving $200 and accidentally removing the thing you were most excited about. Now, the balcony question. Let me address the one that comes up in almost every Alaska cruise conversation. Do you need a balcony? No, you do not need one. I want to say that clearly because there's a lot of marketing energy behind the idea that a balcony is essentially mandatory for Alaska, and it isn't. There are people sailing Alaska in inside cabins right now, having the time of their lives. The mountains don't care which category your cabin is in. That said, Alaska is generally one of the destinations where a balcony can change the texture of the experience in a meaningful way. On a Caribbean cruise, a balcony is a nice private spot to have your morning coffee and occasionally glance at the ocean. On an Alaska cruise, the scenery itself is one of the main things you're there to experience. And having it accessible from your cabin without getting dressed, without sharing the space with other passengers, just pulling back the curtain, finding a forested mountainside passing 10 feet from your face, that's something different. I had a client, a solo traveler in her 60s, who had debated the balcony question for weeks before her Alaska cruise. She'd almost talked herself out of it on the grounds that she was sensible and economical and didn't want to be frivolous. She booked the balcony, and she told me afterward that the best moments of the entire trip was 4:30 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, went out of the balcony in her dressing gown and watched the ship move through a narrow passage with mountains on both sides and no other passengers in sight, and complete silence except for the water. She said it was one of the best hours of her life, which I think is a decent return on the cabin upgrade. But, and this is the part I feel equally strongly about, I don't love it when people stretch their budget so far on the balcony that they can't afford to do anything interesting when they actually get off the ship. If the choice is a balcony cabin with no excursion budget, or an inside cabin plus whale watching and a ride on the White Pass Railway in Skagway, I would usually take the inside cabin and the experiences. You can still go to the public decks. The ship will have multiple outdoor viewing areas, and in Alaska they're well used. You will not be locked in a room for 7 days. The ocean view cabin is often a sensible middle ground. Natural light, views, without always paying the full balcony premium. The question I'd actually ask yourself is, how do you behave on a holiday? Not how you imagine yourself behaving, how do you actually behave? Are you someone who spends time in the cabin, who enjoys quiet morning in private, who sit on the balcony for 2 hours with a book? Or are you the kind of traveler who leaves the cabin after breakfast, is out doing things all day, comes back to shower and sleep, and would have been equally happy in a cardboard box as long as it was comfortable? Both are valid. Just don't pay for an imaginary version of yourself who sits serenely on a balcony every morning when the real you is already off the ship looking for coffee. The cruise fare is not the cruise cost. I want to talk about money for a moment, specifically about the gap between the price that catches your eye and the price you actually end up paying. This is not unique to cruises. Hotels do it, airlines do it, concert venues do it with their convenience fees, quote unquote, that seem to be charged for the convenience of the venue rather than yours. But cruises have a particular talent for it. The fare you see advertised, especially the lead-in fare, is typically just the starting point. Depending on the cruise line, the ship, and the package structure, you may still need to budget for gratuities, which can add a meaningful amount per person per day. Port charges and taxes, which can vary by itinerary. A drinks package if you'd like to have a glass of wine at dinner without mentally calculating whether each sip is worth it. Specialty dining if you want to eat somewhere other than the main restaurant on any given evening. Wi-Fi, which on cruise ship ranges from acceptable to you might as well send letters. Shore excursions, which can be the best experiences of the entire trip and also add up quickly if you're doing something in every port. Transfers to and from the ship, flights, hotels before or after the cruise, particularly for one-way Alaska itineraries, travel insurance, and consistently an alarming number of opportunities to buy a photograph of yourself that you didn't ask anyone to take. I worked with a family a few years ago, 2 adults, 2 kids, who came to me having found what looked like a fantastic price, significantly below anything else they'd seen. They were excited. When we went through the complete picture together, flights from their city, a hotel night before departure, because they couldn't get a morning flight, gratuities for 4 people, a basic drink, and specialty coffee package, transfers, and 2 shore excursions per person, because they had a list of things they wanted to do. The total was substantially different from the fare that had originally caught their attention. Not because anything was hidden, the information was there. But they'd been comparing one line's advertised fare against another line's more complete all-in package, without realizing the 2 numbers weren't measuring the same thing. The number I want to know when I'm helping someone compare options is, what will this trip actually cost by the time you get home? That's the useful number. Everything else is just marketing doing its job. The way I suggest people organize this, think in 3 buckets. The first bucket is the cruise itself, the fare. The second is essential extras, the things you can't reasonably avoid. Taxes, gratuities, transportation to and from the ship, travel insurance, any required documentation. The third bucket is optional experiences, the specialty restaurants, the spa day, the premium excursions, the drinks beyond whatever baseline packages you've chosen. Once you separate those 3 and put realistic numbers against each of them, you can actually compare holidays instead of just comparing advertisements. Don't try to win every port. I want to talk about overscheduling, because I see it constantly and it quickly ruins a lot of trips. There's a kind of traveler, and I say this with genuine affection because I have absolutely been this person, who looks at a port day and sees a problem to be optimized. If we arrive at 8 and leave at 5, that's 9 hours. And if I plan carefully and move efficiently, I can fit in a whale watching excursion, a visit to the Mendenhall Glacier, lunch at the place someone recommended, a quick walk through downtown, and be back on the ship with 20 minutes to spare. Technically possible. Emotionally exhausting. And what you remember afterward isn't any of the individual things. It's the low-grade anxiety that ran underneath all of them. The constant checking of the time, the nagging awareness that you were always slightly behind. For a 7-night Alaska cruise, I usually suggest picking 1 or 2 experiences per port that genuinely matters. The thing you'll still be talking about in 5 years, and letting the rest of the day be unscheduled. Maybe whale watching in Juneau is the dream you've had for years. Book it properly, budget for it, don't rush it. Maybe the White Pass Railway in Skagway is on the list because you've read about it and you know you love it. Make that an anchor. And then maybe in Ketchikan, you just walk around. You eat something from somewhere local. You find a bench and you look at the water. That's not a waste of a port day. That is, in fact, a port day. I had a client who came back from his Alaska cruise and told me the best hour of the entire trip was sitting on a dock in a small port town eating fish and chips and watching seaplanes land. He hadn't planned it. He finished his 1 excursion of the day and had time left over, and he just sat. And he said it was the first time in years he'd felt properly still. You cannot schedule that thing, but you can protect the space for it to happen. One practical note about excursions. When you book through the cruise line, the ship coordinates with those official excursions and will generally hold departure if something runs along. When you book independently, which can be a great option, often smaller groups, sometimes a better experience, usually a lower price, the ship will not wait for you. It genuinely will not. The ship has a schedule. It has port fees and pilot arrangements and 1,000 other constraints. And your independent kayaking tour being 20 minutes behind is not going to change any of that. So if you book independently, be honest with yourself about the timing and give yourself a real buffer. Not a probably fine if everything goes perfectly buffer. A buffer that accounts for the thing that might not go perfectly, because something usually does. Alaska weather requires layers, not confidence. People ask me with great regularity what the weather will be on their Alaska cruise. And my answer, which I mean genuinely and not as a deflection, is yes. It will be weather. There will be some of it. The specific variety is difficult to predict. Southeast Alaska, which is where most cruise itineraries spend the majority of their time, is a temperate rainforest. It is, in the technical meteorological sense, a place where it rains. Not constantly, not miserably, but regularly enough that you should not plan your entire holiday around sunshine and be surprised when clouds appear. I have seen beautiful, clear, warm days in Alaska in July. I've also seen July days in Alaska that were 50 degrees and drizzling from dawn to dusk. I have seen both of these happen to people on the same sailing on different days. The packing approach that works is layers. Not one enormous coat that you either need desperately or are dragging around all day. A comfortable base layer, a warm mid layer, a fleece, a light down jacket, something you can add or remove easily, A waterproof outer layer, especially one that actually works rather than one that's technically water resistant until it meets actual rain. At which point it remembers that it is in fact just a slightly stiff jacket. Good walking shoes with grip because you will be on wet surfaces. A hat, something for your hands if you get cold easily. And binoculars. I say this every time and I will keep saying it. People remember their cameras. People forget binoculars. A camera is how you prove you saw something. Binoculars are how you actually see it. Alaska has whales. It has bears. It has eagles that are close enough to photograph, but extraordinary when you actually see their faces. Bring binoculars. The small compact ones fit in a jacket pocket. There's no reason not to. A few logistical notes before I move on. Keep your travel document, any important medication, and at least one change of clothes in your carry-on when you board the ship. Checked luggages doesn't always reach your cabin on embarkation day, and you do not want to spend your first evening in Alaska discovering that your passport is somewhere in a suitcase that is apparently on its own journey. On documents, specifically, for Canadian citizens, a valid Canadian passport is the most straightforward and universally accepted option for Alaska cruising. But if you're a permanent resident, if you're traveling on a different country's passport, if you're from somewhere that has particular US entry requirements, please check your specific situations. Don't just do what your friend is doing because you both live in Surrey. Your immigration status and theirs may be completely different, and finding this out while boarding a ship is not the ideal moment. Travel insurance is not the boring part. Nobody has ever posted a photograph on Instagram with the caption, "Look at this incredible emergency medical evacuation coverage I secured." It doesn't happen. Insurance is not photogenic. It is, however, important. And Alaska cruises are specifically the kind of travel where this matters more than usual. Cruises cross international borders. They operate on vessels. They involve remote locations. They include shore activities that can range from gentle walking tours to helicopter glacier landings. The Government of Canada recommends travel insurance that specifically covers cruising, shore excursions, hospitalization, and medical evacuation. And that last item is the one people most commonly dismiss. I understand why. It's just Alaska, is the thought. It's not that far away. And geographically, that is true. Alaska is not the other side of the world. But medical evacuation doesn't care about geography. If you have a serious medical event in a remote fjord and need to be airlifted to a hospital, the bill for the process alone can be catastrophic regardless of where in the world you happen to be. I have seen it happen. Not often, thankfully, but enough to know that the people who thought it wouldn't happen to them were not wrong to think that. It usually doesn't, but they also weren't accounting for what it usually means when it stops being true. Read the policy. I know that's everyone's least favorite advice, but read enough of it to understand. Whether pre-existing conditions are covered and under what terms, whether the cruise itself is covered, whether the specific excursions you're planning are covered, whether trip interruption coverage makes sense for your flights and hotel arrangements. If you're doing a one-way Alaska cruise with land arrangements on top, you want to make sure the whole picture is covered, not just the sailing portion. Insurance isn't about being afraid to travel, it's about protecting the financial foundation that lets you travel again. Arrive early, please, I'm begging you. This section is short because the advice is simple, and the people who ignore it are the people I worry about most. Do not fly into the cruise city on the same day the ship departs. I know why people do it. It saves a hotel night, it saves money, and it often works. I don't want to pretend it never works, but I've seen it fail, and when it fails completely. The ship does not wait. Repeat with me. The ship does not wait. This is not a figure of speech. The ship has a schedule. It is legally and logistically obligated to keep, and your missed connections is not a variable in that calculation. One delayed flight, one mechanical issue on the first aircraft, one unreasonably long security line at the connecting airport, one piece of luggage that didn't make the transfer. Any of those things on a normal travel day is an inconvenience. On the day your ship sails, any of those things is a potential disaster. Arrive at least a day early when you're flying to the departure city. If the itinerary is complicated, one-way Alaska cruise with multiple flights and land arrangements, consider 2 days. Give the journey some room. Let your body settle. Let embarkation morning feel like the beginning of a holiday instead of the final crisis stage of a relay race you'd been losing since 4 a.m. I had a client who'd flown in the day before, spent a pleasant evening in Vancouver, had a good sleep, had a relaxed breakfast, and arrived at the port unhurried. She told me boarding the ship felt like an event rather than a rescue. That's how it should feel. So, who is an Alaska cruise actually for? It works beautifully for families with a range of ages and energy levels. Grandparents and grandchildren, for instance, can share the experience without anyone having to hike beyond their ability, because the ship itself does the traveling. It works for couples who want genuine wilderness without organizing a self-drive adventure from scratch. It works for first-time visitors to Alaska who want an oriented introduction to the region before deciding if they want to go deeper. And it works wonderfully for anyone who truly enjoys unpacking once and being done with it, which is something I personally appreciate the more older I get. It is probably a less natural fit for someone who wants deep immersion in one place over time, or who finds organized tourism genuinely frustrating rather than just occasionally a bit silly, or who wants to feel completely off the beaten path. A cruise is efficient. You see several places in 1 week in relative comfort. But efficiency is not the same as intimacy. You get a real introduction to Juneau and Skagway and Ketchikan, but you're visiting on a ship schedule. The town exists between your arrival and your departure, and then you leave. There's a phrase I keep coming back to, which is that a cruise is a wonderful way to fall in like with a place. Falling in love with it might require going back. That's not a criticism, it's just a format. And the happiest cruise travelers I've worked with are not necessarily people who love everything about cruising. They're people who understood what the format was before they booked, and chose it deliberately. Last word. After doing this work for a while, the pattern I keep coming back to is this. People rarely regret having understood their trip too thoroughly before booking. What they regret is assuming. They assume the cheapest cabin will be fine. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And the difference is usually whether they thought about it or not. They assume the balcony is essential. Sometimes it is, sometimes they barely use it. They assume all cruise lines feel roughly the same. They really don't. They assume the advertised price is the full price. It isn't. They assume the Alaska itinerary includes the glacier from the advertisement. It might not. They assume July weather will be warm and cooperative. It mostly is, until it isn't. And they assume the ship will wait if their flight is a little late. It won't. Most travel problems are not caused by bad luck. They're caused by unexamined assumptions that seemed reasonable at the time. My job, as I understand it, isn't simply to hand someone a cruise booking. It's to ask, why this cruise? Why this ship? Why this time of year? Why this cabin? Why this itinerary? And does all of that actually fit the people who are going? Because sometimes the more expensive option is genuinely better. And sometimes it's just more expensive. Sometimes the balcony is worth every dollar. And sometimes you'll have used it twice by the end of the week. Sometimes the famous excursion is the memory of a lifetime. And sometimes the best moment of the entire trip is standing on an open public deck, watching the mountains pass by in silence, not having paid extra for anything at all. A better journey isn't assembled by purchasing every upgrade. It's built by knowing what actually matters to you, before someone with a commission and a brochure tries to tell you what that is. So before you book your Alaska cruise, read the itinerary before you fall in love with the ship. Compare the full vacation cost, not just the opening fare. Make sure there's room in the budget for the experiences that will actually mean something to you. Arrive early, dress in layers, carry your documents in the right bag, get the insurance, and deliberately leave some unscheduled space in the trip. Because the moments you didn't plan are often the ones you end up talking about. Because Alaska isn't a checklist, it's a scale, it's silence, it's water and forest and ice and mountains so large they make a cruise ship look surprisingly, unexpectedly small. And maybe that's partly the point, to briefly be somewhere that puts everything back into proportion. This has been The Better Journey. I'm Anadi from Global Dunya. And wherever you're traveling next, I hope you don't just take the trip. I hope you understand the journey. See you in the next one.